Our next discussion is going to be about global ecosystems and the lessons that we can learn and apply in the MENA region. So please welcome Micheal Lints, partner at Golden Gate Ventures. Micheal, can I have you on stage, please? Micheal. Yeah. All right. Micheal is joined by Nagesh Rao, startup ecosystem architect. And the discussion will be moderated by Megen Mitchell, Director of Fellowships and Student Programs, MIT Center for Development and Entrepreneurship.
Okay.
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
So we should at least be good there. All right. So hi, everyone. As the moderator said, my name is Megen Mitchell. I'm the Director of Student and Fellowship Programs at MIT in a program called the Legatum Center. And there we're focused on actually working with students who are building companies, building and scaling for-profit companies in emerging markets, like the Middle East and MENA, like Africa, Southeast Asia. So, woo! So I'm very excited to hear what our panelists have to say tonight as I work with and advise students on how to build and scale companies in the markets they're working in. So with me today is Nagesh Rao, a startup ecosystem architect, and I'm going to ask him to tell you a little bit about what that means before we get started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan, and thank you to the Sharjah Entrepreneurship Festival for having us here today. So my background is varied. I've worked in intellectual property law, venture capital, startups, entrepreneurship perspective, and I currently work with MAS Holdings, and with MAS Holdings I do our intellectual property due diligence, but also our next-gen R&D. MAS Holdings is a major OEM and textile manufacturing company out of South Asia, and we operate around the world, and we do R&D manufacturing for Nike, Lululemon, Speedo, whatnot, Ralph Lauren. But in my prior life, I've also worked in helping generate and grow ecosystems, innovation ecosystems across the world. And I worked on, during Obama administration 1, during one of my times in government service, I worked on a program called the I-6 program. The I-6 program was focused around public-private partnerships and how do you get the various resources and stakeholders who would make an ecosystem work, and that would be the government, the university, and industry partners. And when you put those different pieces together, how do they increase access to capital, access to mentor flow, access to just operational resources to get your business started scaling up and growing so that you can become a bit more formidable in the markets at play.
Amazing. Then we also have here Micheal, who's with Golden Gate Ventures, representing kind of the East perspective. So can you just talk a little bit about how you ended up at Golden Gate Ventures and a little bit more about your background?
Sure, Megan. Thanks to be here. My name is Micheal Lints. I am Dutch born and raised. I've been in Singapore for about 6.5 years. I'm a partner at Golden Gate Ventures. So Golden Gate is a very early stage venture capital firm. We invest in early stage companies across Southeast Asia. So that is countries like Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia. We currently have 4 funds under management, 3 early stage funds, and 1 later stage fund that does Series B and Series C. In total, about close to $500 million, with offices in Singapore and Jakarta. Lovely to be here. Can't wait for our discussion and talk about East versus West.
Fantastic. So let's jump in, because I think hopefully you all agree we have 2 fantastic people to represent the relative strengths and weaknesses and questions about those markets. So Micheal, I'm going to go back to you. Let's talk a little bit about the ecosystem in Southeast Asia. You're working out of Singapore specifically, but what do you see as the relative strengths and relative challenges of the markets?
So Southeast Asia is a very young ecosystem. Effectively, the venture ecosystem is only 7 to 8 years old. So when we started our first fund back in 2011, 2012, there weren't too many VCs on the ground actually. So most companies were your typical e-commerce companies and your typical content companies, and there wasn't much depth at that point in time. Fast forward to now, and we were discussing about this earlier, Last year alone, there was $14.3 billion invested in the Southeast Asian ecosystem. A large portion of it was taken by two companies, Gojek and Grab. You can compare them with Careem in this region. So ride-hailing companies that have become major platforms. But you're seeing companies in the travel space like Traveloka, companies in the education space, and companies in the healthcare space. I think the advantage of being in the ecosystem now, there's been a lot of attention on the growth of Southeast Asia for a number of reasons. We've seen companies out of China, like Alibaba, Tencent, investing heavily into the region. We're seeing major firms out of the US, like Excel, Kleiner Perkins, Sequoia, making bigger investments in startups, so there's more capital available for young entrepreneurs. And I think more importantly, you were seeing a lot of governments opening up regulation and opening up the ecosystem, making it easier for young people to start their business. You have to imagine that in Asia, typically their parents would prefer kids to go to law school or to work for a major company as opposed to starting their own business. We're seeing more and more as entrepreneurs are becoming successful that it's more common to start your own company. And just as an example, so we as a venture capital firm, we see around 1,100 to 1,200 deals on a yearly basis. What is the downside and what makes it difficult to be in Southeast Asia? It's basically 7 or 8 major countries. So if you're a company based in Singapore and you want to expand to, let's say, Indonesia, it basically almost means starting all over again. It's a new country, it's different language, it's different regulation, it's different cultures. So it's very difficult to expand from one country to another. And typical as a VC, you want to see fast growth and fast expansion. So that's one of the biggest challenges you face as a founder in the region.
So, Nagesh, I'm struck that Micheal said it's a young and vibrant, ecosystem, relatively speaking to the US, which is a little bit more established. Can you talk about the relative benefits of that, but then also the disadvantages?
Absolutely, thanks. So the thing to keep in mind about the US innovation ecosystem, and not even just US, I would say North America innovation ecosystem, is that although it's more robust with resources, it's a bit, I would say, lagging because of the assets, right? So that the assets and infrastructure are legacy. So they're going to go with what they like and what they understand and what they know. So that risk appetite is not the same, I think, as South Asia, for example. And I think part of that is based on the sectors that are in play. I mean, the largest sector is still software, but you've got advances in IT, hardware, robotics coming into play. Health has become a bigger issue, the health sector, and even clean energy. But I remember 10 years ago when I was working in clean tech, that was a big boom and then bust all of a sudden by 2011, 2012. And now we're starting to see that resurgence in clean tech again. But even then, what's happened is with the rise and fall of these different sectors across the innovation ecosystems, you're starting to see who actually has skin in the game with the concrete infrastructure. Case in point, I came from upstate New York, Albany, New York, and Albany had its boom and bust. And right now its boom is nanotech, but that was a result of some serious long-term investments over 10 plus years, and the fact that you had a lot of legacy assets in the chemical and material science space that the region could capitalize on and repurpose and utilize. I think we're seeing that right now in Boston, where you're from, for example, a bigger push in biotech and clean tech, but that's also because of legacy assets and repurposing of those assets before. But that doesn't happen naturally across the country because it requires re-engineering. And because it's not a blank canvas, you have those legacy drawbacks that sometimes keep the region from kind of figuring out what its new potential could be. Pittsburgh, for example, is having the renaissance post-steel with robotics, and I think Detroit is trying to figure out what it's going to be post-automotive. So it comes with pushes and pulls.
Yeah, I think you make a point that's worth digging into, where it's a little bit easier to realize that Southeast Asia is 9 different countries and 9 different markets. There are very different ecosystems within the US too. You can't necessarily think about going into the US and just, not everything belongs in Silicon Valley. Not everything belongs in,
The U.S. is its own region, right? And then Canada. So I do a lot of work for MAS out of Canada, Montreal, and Montreal itself has got its own robust innovation ecosystem. But that's in part because there's this big push by PM Trudeau for the National Research Council in Canada to really drive through into the sectors that they think Canadians can actually lead on, which is why MAS has been partnering up there instead.
Yeah, maybe one more interesting difference between East and West. In Southeast Asia, we're still solving very basic problems. Mm-hmm. So as an example, if you are an e-commerce company and you are shipping packages from Philippines to Indonesia, you have to deal with customs in 2 countries as opposed to 1. So customs in the Philippines and in Indonesia. Yep. If you're unlucky, you have to manage 7 or 8 trucking companies to get your package from inland Philippines to inland Indonesia. There's warehousing, which is difficult. There's so much things that you have to do on the e-commerce sites just to send a package from A to B. Although we have UPS and FedEx as well, inland makes it much more difficult. So you have to solve really basic problems to kind of build your business.
Okay. There's something else there was a contrast of what, in both of your remarks, the risk profile, Michael, you said is really is elevating. People are becoming much more comfortable with risk. And then Nagesh, your point was actually people are less comfortable with risk than I think might be expected, which I just think is an interesting contrast because people think that the U.S. is the place where everyone will take risks and failure is okay. And
I think because case in point right now, we're seeing what's happened with WeWork, mm-hmm. right? So the risk profile and risk appetite's changing a little bit because you've seen this new round of unicorns, and I think Najla said it best, that ambitious sustainable plan is required, and what we've been seeing again in North America, and I think even around the world, is there's been a group of folks who've been reckless with their approach to startup growth and small and scaling up. And that's starting to get people going, whoa, hold on, are those the actual companies we want to be celebrating and scaling up? I worked in corporate venture for a bit too, and with corporate venture, we're looking for strategic fits, and if they don't strategically fit with our 5-10 year plan from a merger acquisition or even like our product line portfolio growth, we're not interested. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think in general, what has taken 5-6 years to kind of create the risk profile is now really taken off. It's a bit of a mix of a few things. China is kind of still our big example. If you look at Southeast Asia, it's our next door neighbor. It's a very, very big ecosystem. So people take as example of the companies that are built there. If you look at Didi, Tencent, but also Baidu, JD, the larger tech companies, they kind of give an example. But they've also decided to heavily invest in the Southeast Asian ecosystem. That also helps entrepreneurs. So for instance, Alibaba has their entrepreneurs fund. They really help entrepreneurs on the ground and sort of build their first business. And that inspires more young people to kind of say, I'm ready to make the jump. It's still scary, but at least there's sort of a cushion when it comes to get financial backing, get mentorship, get support, get advisory, and get a lot of added value people on board when I build my business.
Yep. That added value is so important. I think everyone's trying to chase the money. And although the money is important, I think it's actually the people and the networks that come in that are just as important, if not more important. I always told folks I worked with, I'd rather take an investment from someone who's got a bigger network we can work with than just pure cash and no network to play with.
Yeah, maybe one funny anecdote. So we did a deal in a lending company, this is about 2.5 years ago. And at some point we were talking to the founders. It was a very competitive round. And the founder said, so what does Golden Gate Ventures going to do for us compared to the other VCs? So we did the entire spiel and said, we have a fundraiser on board. We have a head of talent that will help you with recruiting. We have a CFO for hire that you can sort of have in your company for a few months, and he'll help you with financial modeling. He's like, okay, interesting, that sounds good. And then he eventually said, and this comes to cultural differences, he said, well, maybe we should have a meeting at my place, at his house, so you can meet my parents and my family. And my partner was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, apart from the money and the added value, I also want to trust you as a person. Mm-hmm. So he literally flew to his house, spent the night with his parents, had dinner, talked about life, and we eventually got the deal. But it's very, very important to have that relationship with the founders that you invest in, and show real added value to them as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so both of you are just in town for a few days, but I want to kind of put you in a role play and imagine yourself as an aspiring or a young entrepreneur that's here at the conference and from the region, from the GCC region, and what types of companies what do you see as the relative advantages that the entrepreneurs here should be taking advantage of, while they're here, from what they're going to start, particularly if they're thinking really on that bigger scale, of eventually moving into other markets?
Yeah, interesting. So we actually had a discussion about this yesterday evening, so thank you for asking.
Okay.
I was speaking with a few VCs in Dubai, and we were kind of talking about what are the bigger trends here and where should you be focusing on as an entrepreneur. There were two things that inspired me. So one was education. You can think of education as tutoring in general, but we've seen a lot of tutoring apps and applications. But I think if you go sort of one layer deeper, if you think of how can you enable schools to leverage technology for their kids. So one example that we've seen in Singapore is a company that gamified Singapore math and made it fun for kids to actually do math. So there's math competitions, there's a daily ranking. The eventual test after 2 years showed that kids were more engaged when they were doing math. Mm-hmm. And I see those types of companies should be able to be built here, kind of homegrown. I think the other one would be healthcare. I'm very passionate about healthcare myself, but I would say in general, I think there is a big opportunity for entrepreneurs in this market to think about, how can we engage more in digital health? Is there anything we can do on the biomed side? I think there's enough talent here. There are amazing universities here as well.
Yeah.
So I think healthcare could be a big industry here as well.
Okay, so we've got ed tech and we've got health. Yeah, Nagesh, any other areas?
So I think what's been fascinating for me, and I've now come here a couple times to the region, but in the MENA and MESA region, you have a very diverse culture. Yesterday at CNN Dubai when we were there, finding out that only the population of Dubai is about 5% Emiratis, right? And the rest is influx of folks from all over the world. That right there tells me that that's a nice, diverse talent pipeline to work with, going from the innovation, brain talent, but also what's interesting is it's a great test bed environment. If you're rolling out like an edtech platform or a consumer product platform, whatever it may be, you now have a very diverse audience you can work with testing and playing with your product and seeing what could be the potential marketplace by having that product offering, for South Asians or having it for Europeans or North Americans, whatever it may be. That, when I thought about that, I was like, oh my God, you can get a lot of different product results in survey analysis from that diverse pool right off the bat.
Really interesting, really interesting. So, what are some examples of companies that you've seen that have come to your markets? I do really well with stories. I'm better with the case learning than the storytelling. That's how I can draw connections. So companies that have expanded, it doesn't necessarily have to be from this region, but from another geographic region into Southeast Asia and into the US, and what have they done right, and where are their lessons learned as well? What they did wrong.
So one example would be, I'll name two examples. So one example is a company out of the US, so Stripe, expanded to Singapore, this is about 4 years ago. So they're now in 3 markets, Singapore, Hong Kong, and in Malaysia. They eventually took quite a long time to expand to the market because they had to understand what were the nuances in the different countries. I think what they've done right is they decided to work with partners in each and every country, and didn't say we know best and we'll do it on our own. So they work with local VCs, they work with local banks, they work with local financial institutions to kind of land their product, and they were very smart about doing a lot of startup programs and a lot of events to kind of announce, we're going to be in this ecosystem. You can ask us for advice when it comes to payments. If you want to implement us in your web store, we have this entire team that's available to you to help you. So I think that was a big part of it. What we've seen gone wrong when people try to expand to the region is they still assume that Asia is Asia, and it kind of looks alike. Well, it's very, very different. So you have to think about in which country do I want to start, for example. So we always encourage companies to do a lot of research before expanding here. We had an e-commerce company that did, when you check out, you can basically get financing for the item, and worked very well in Europe. Wanted to do the same expansion in Southeast Asia, but then the biggest issue was if you go to Indonesia, only 20% of people have a credit card. So anyone that purchases something online, cash on delivery is very important, bank-to-bank transfers are very important, and they were only enabled for credit cards, which makes it very, very difficult to implement that product. And this could be really resolved by just doing research and kind of understanding the market.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest things that we basically say is when you look at the region, it's very interesting, it's growing fast, but you have to think about, take some time to really understand that your markets that you're expanding to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to echo it, I'm going to use one from MIT. It's actually one of my favorites. It's Soren and Sam from Promethean Power Systems.
Yep.
So, and the reason why I'm using Promethean is because, well, to start off, Soren is an immigrant. Soren came to the US and decided he wanted to pursue entrepreneurship after being a grad student at MIT, right? And him and his colleagues founded Greentown Labs, which was this clean tech innovation, co-sharing workspace environment up in Boston. And I remember when they were building it out, they asked me, should we be near MIT? Should we be near Harvard? And I said, you want to be somewhere where everyone feels welcomed. And I think that was part of the reason why they did Somerville, because all the universities around there felt welcomed, and it wasn't just an MIT-centric only organization. But I think with also what Soren did, besides building out Greentown Labs, when he was working with Sam on building out Promethean Power Systems, and Promethean Power Systems was a clean tech energy platform. It was basically battery technology used for chilling and cooling, especially in regions where energy supply is not adequate. And I thought it was fascinating what Soren was doing is that he was using the intellectual talent and manufacturing resources that were there in the Boston region, especially with MIT. But then he was using the test bed environment of South Asia, in particular India. And so being able to play off those two resources to build their company out was fascinating to me. I thought it was interesting that they got their first deal, major deal with Amul Dairy, which is a major dairy production conglomerate in India. And being able to recognize that their technology platform had multiple uses, but figuring out who needed it first to get that revenue coming in before they scaled out to other areas. So I think that was an interesting play for Soren, and he capitalized on the testbed environment of India, he capitalized on the network around him in MIT, he capitalized on the use of funding opportunities that came to him, both in the form of private equity, but also with state and federal funding. Using that non-dilutive funding to help him de-risk the technology and scale up and grow was pretty fascinating to me.
So purely tactical, because you start to talk right there a little bit about funding and things like that. If someone's trying to bring a company into the US, and if there's similar resources, it's I would assume a little more fragmented kind of in Southeast Asia, but what types of programs exist? Where are there resources that people could tap into and places to get that kind of information and maybe build some of those networks?
Absolutely. So I think if you're coming from abroad into the U.S., there's programs from Commerce Department. So like the International Trade Administration and Select USA and then OPIC and the Overseas Private Investment Corporation and even World Bank, IMF, they have some. It all depends on the different initiatives that are in play. But I think what's also more unique about what's going on in North America are these accelerators that are all over the U.S. Right, and they're focused on different sectors of interest. If you're in, everyone knows 500 Startups in Y Combinator, but there's, if you're a clean tech entrepreneur, Los Angeles is actually a good area to go because there's LA Clean Tech Incubator. If you're in health, there's a team up in Washington that does health ventures up with University of Washington, or even at the Dell Medical School in Texas. So if you go across North America, whether it's in Mexico or US or Canada, there are all these different pockets of innovation going on, and it's not necessarily tied to the Silicon Valley model. It might have that Silicon Valley ethos, but the whole idea is that it's tackling you tapping into resources that are naturally located within that region, whether it's people, universities, financial assistance, whatever it may be. There's a hotbed of activity occurring that will help ease your way in to go through the startup and small business environment. Techstars, I think, has been a great example of that. Techstars has done a great job all across North America to help nurture that entrepreneurial talent that wants to come from overseas into North America, rather than just kind of stop it and then head back home.
Yeah, Techstars has done an interesting job of actually, in a lot of instances, partnering with big corporates for industry-specific types of accelerators. So, ag tech.
Yep.
You bring people to Minnesota to do ag tech with Cargill, for example.
Yeah, they're doing a materials accelerator, material science accelerator out of Indiana. Lisa Mitchell's been running that one. I've been a mentor for that group. They're doing the defense one up in Boston, if I recall.
Yeah, they've got all sorts of different. So there's one thing I can't reiterate enough. It's not the startup ecosystem in the U.S. is not just Silicon Valley. There's so many different interesting places all around the U.S. that different types of innovation is happening. Any resources? I mean, it's a little bit more of a earlier environment, but resources people should be aware of in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say Singapore, first and foremost, is a very welcoming ecosystem for up and coming startups. Even if you come to the region, they have a number of grants and visas for new entrepreneurs that are coming on board. So basically, if you reach out to the Economic Development Board in Singapore, they can help you kind of navigate that landscape. They're funny enough, they also make introductions to VC, so likely, hopefully you'll see us as well. I would say in Singapore, it is finding the first person to talk to, and that person tends to make a lot of introductions into the ecosystem, and it works really fast. It's still a very, very collaborative ecosystem, so it's easy to get from one conversation, you get 4 or 5 other conversations, so that happens relatively fast. We also have Techstars on the ground, so Techstars has a team in Singapore. Entrepreneur First is also very active in Singapore, so they do a program where if you have an idea, they put you together with another founder and you can work on the idea in their program. Recently there was Antler, they've launched there as well, or they're headquartered in Singapore. Similar model, so if you have an idea, they'll put you together with another founder and you can work on your idea with the founding team. They'll give you a small grant to kick off. So it's a very, very open ecosystem. But I would say start with the Economic Development Board and they will kind of put you in the right direction.
Amazing.
I'd also add, I've been pretty impressed with the work that Global Entrepreneurship Network does, and I would say that's another organization, if you're looking to go, whether it's east to west or west to east, getting plugged in with the Global Entrepreneurship Network is a nice big network. And on LinkedIn, there's the On Startups community, the Gen Network, and those folks. It's all these various folks who are interested in startups, entrepreneurship activity, and so plugging in and getting to know folks is a great way to network and access resources that folks may not realize exist.
Amazing. So we've got just about 2 minutes left, so I want each of you to look a little bit into the future, because again, these are earlier stage entrepreneurs and markets change and the world is changing more quickly than ever before. So start with you, Micheal. What do you see as kind of the trends? Where's the entrepreneurship ecosystem and trends and pathways in Southeast Asia?
I think the mantra is try to solve real problems. Is big. It's fine if you're into, I want to build a company that kind of already exists, but I'll give it kind of a local or regional flavor. But I think one of the bigger trends we're seeing is founders solving really real and big problems, and that are becoming massive markets. And I'll give one example. So there's one company in Singapore, it's basically 4 PhDs that were sitting in a basement coding on some stuff. And what they built was a communication layer based on quantum technology to improve satellite communication. And this is important for farming, it is important for satellite communication. It's a small company founded in Singapore that is attacking a real and actual problem. And we're seeing the same in agriculture, we're seeing the same in healthcare, we're seeing the same in education, we're seeing the same in insurance. So I'd say, as an entrepreneur, really take a step back, And if you would have a blank sheet of paper and you were able to solve a big problem, what would that be?
Okay, good.
I'd echo his same thoughts. I think deep tech, hard tech, that's where the plays are. So health, food, water, space, the harder stuff. But you have to be in it for the long haul. It's a 5-10 year plan, not a 1-2 year.
Sure. That's where the impact is, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I think I would like to ask all of you to join me in thanking our panelists for our fireside chat. I think really great experts on these markets, and for those of you who are entrepreneurs now, aspiring entrepreneurs, and want to think beyond, start here, think beyond here, and understand what's happening in other markets. These are your experts. So thank you all for being here and being a great audience.
Thank you.